Well, good morning, my brothers. My name is Ken Haynes. I went to Music City Tres Dias number 37, where I sat at the table of Paul. Today's March 17th, so we turn to the book of Proverbs, chapter 17, for God's daily dose of wisdom. And as I was reading through Proverbs 17, verse 3 jumped off the page, and it reads like this: The refining pot is for silver, and the furnace for gold, but the Lord tests the hearts. Interesting. It's very similar to Proverbs 27:21, where we read, the crucible is for silver and the furnace for gold, and each is tested by the praise according him. Okay, what's he talking about here? Well, that word tests, where it says the Lord tests the hearts, that's actually a word that is used, the original. It's talking about melting metal in order to prove it, in order to determine what's inside of it. So he's continuing the metaphor of the refining pot for silver and the furnace for gold with this idea of the Lord melting the heart to see what's inside. Now, the whole idea of the crucible and the furnace for refining gold and silver is an idea that is spread throughout the Bible in many different places. And it's the notion of separating out impurities from the precious metal, the gold or the silver, in order to come up with, or in order to have a pure metal, pure silver or pure gold. And that's throughout the Old Testament in many, many different places. What he's talking about here is the whole process of separating sin from man. And he uses the metaphor of the refining of silver and gold in order to bring that idea to bear. And there's a story about how in this one Bible study, this group of ladies, they decided they wanted to find out, okay, what is that process that you go through when you refine silver, you refine gold. And so they went down to a local silversmith, and they asked if they could watch him as he refined the silver, as he purified the silver. And so they did. They sat around, and what he did is he took the silver and he put it into the crucible, and he took the crucible and he set it into the fire, and he watched over the crucible, and the silver would melt. And what he would do is he would take an iron spoon, if you will, and he would stir it up, and the dross or the impurities would float to the surface, and he would scrape it off, and he'd turn the heat up a little bit more, and then he'd stick that spoon in there and he'd stir it up even more, and then the rest of the impurities would get forced out because of the heat and the stirring, and it would float to the surface, and he would scrape it off. And he would do that over and over again. And the ladies were fascinated by this process, and they said, well, how do you know when it's pure? And he says, well, that's easy. I just look into the crucible, and if I can see my own reflection, then I know that it's been purified. What a picture of what God does for us. He puts us into the fire, and he stirs things up in our lives, and it forces the impurities out of us, and he scrapes them off. And he does that over and over again until he sees his own reflection in the cup. Now, the ladies were concerned, and they said, well, is it possible that something could go wrong? And he says, oh, yeah, it's very possible. If I leave it there in the fire without keeping my eye on it, it could be destroyed. Wow, what a great picture. God keeps us in the fire only long enough to purify us, and he makes sure that he keeps his eye on us so that we're not destroyed. You know, that idea of being in the fire and being tested and having those impurities removed from us is an idea that's carried over into the New Testament as well. Listen to these words out of Hebrews chapter 12, verse 6. He says, for those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. If you're a follower of Christ, you can be sure that he's going to be in the process of purifying you. He does that through trials and tribulations. He does that in order to prove our faith, in order to test our hearts, but yes, in order to remove the impurities from us as well. You remember the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Daniel chapter 3? They would not bow down to this idol that King Nebuchadnezzar had erected, and they would not worship this idol. And King Nebuchadnezzar says, if you don't do it, I'm going to throw you into the furnace. And they said, well, you go ahead and throw us into the furnace because we're not going to do it. And they bound up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they tossed them into the furnace. They heated up the furnace 7 times hotter than it ever had been heated before, and they threw them into the furnace. In fact, the guys who bound them and threw them into the furnace died as a result of getting so close to the fire. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the only thing that were burned away from them were the shackles that bound them. That's how God refines us in the fire, in the midst of the fire. He takes away the things that are binding us up, and he frees us so that we can prove the faith that we have. Listen to these words out of James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. He tests us in the fire. Finally, these words out of 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6 through 7. In this you greatly rejoice, even though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been distressed by various trials, so that the proof of your faith, being more precious than gold, which is perishable, even though tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. People are watching your life. People are watching my life. And it's in the endurance of going through those trials and the testing of our faith through the furnace that people can see the genuineness of our faith. And they can see that we walk steadfastly, and Jesus is walking through the fire with us, and our joy is never lost. Yes, it may be difficult. Yes, we may be placed in the furnace because of circumstances beyond our control and for purposes that may have been evil, like with King Nebuchadnezzar. But nonetheless, the refining pot is for silver and the furnace for gold, but the Lord tests the hearts. He's with us in the midst of the fire. He will bring us through. He will keep us safe, and we will have a testimony to him and his goodness at the end. My brothers, I love you, each and every one of you. Praying for the ladies this weekend. I know they're going to have an encounter with Christ. I know it's going to be a life-changing experience for them as it was for all of us. May God bless you today. Go out and make a difference in someone's life. I love you.